afternoon. I'm usually not greeted with applause like that. My name's Roger Ream. I'm president of the Fund for American Studies, and we're pleased to have such a great turnout today to hear Senator Rand Paul. We have started this Capitol Hill lecture series 7 or 8 years ago to provide interns with really good content to enhance their summer here in Washington, D.C. And we work closely with Senator Rand Paul and his staff to make sure that we have great space and great speakers for you to hear from. We got a standing room only crowd, as you'll see. I appreciate your willingness to be here and stand. We're going to be doing 3 more of these in July. We have your email address. We'll send you the information, and hopefully you can join us for the future events. They've just been outstanding over the years. The Fund for American Studies sponsors internship programs. We do a lot of teaching economics, both for high school, college, and young professionals. We have close to 300 students this summer doing internships in Washington in our journalism, public policy, international affairs, leadership programs. They're taking courses while they're here at George Mason University in economics and other topics. If you want to learn more about our programs, you can find it easily at dcinternships.org. dcinternships.org. You can come for a semester, a summer, study free market economics, and have a great internship experience and lots of great lectures like this one. Well, Senator Rand Paul doesn't need a long introduction. I'll just tell you a few basics in case you don't know. He was elected in 2010 from the Commonwealth of Kentucky. His home is in Bowling Green. He's not a professional politician. He grew up in Lake Jackson, Texas, went undergraduate at Baylor, to medical school at Duke, and is an ophthalmologist, and had a practice going in ophthalmology before being elected to the United States Senate. He likes to say, I think, or I like to say that as an ophthalmologist, he's great at diagnosing problems, illnesses, disease, and finding solutions. And that's what he tries to do in his job as a U.S. Senator. He believes in our Constitution. He believes in our free enterprise system, the rule of law, limited government, and that animates his work on all the issues he works on. He serves on the Small Business Committee, Foreign Relations, Homeland Security. He's often in the news for the principled stance he takes. So please join me in welcoming Senator Rand Paul.
Thank you. What a crowd. You probably came because free lunch, right? So, but what's great about it is you do get free lunch, but there really is no such thing as free lunch, all right? You're getting free lunch because of one of Roger's founders and funders have bought you lunch. And we want you to do that, and that's great. And that's probably why I came. But we'll try to give you some good content, too. I do have really good news. I just came from the White House, and Joe Biden, you may not have heard this, on July 4th, inside, you can take your mask off if you are with family members only, as long as you don't speak or eat. That is kind of funny to me, maybe not to everybody, but the thing is that in a free society, we would all make these decisions ourselves. You'd get advice from the government. You'd take some, you'd not take some, you'd evaluate the pros and cons of the advice. But in a free society, you would make your own healthcare decisions. You say, well, what about everybody else? What about everybody else? Well, the thing is that there needs to be some basis to the science. We can't just sort of say, do this, and don't, give us any examples of how the science shows that this is what we should be doing. There are arguments for freedom, for having a liberty society, a liberty-based society that we have, and I usually put them into 2 categories. The first is the liberty argument. These are the arguments basically for having limited small government. The liberty argument is what Thomas Paine put forward when he said that government is a necessary evil. And you can just see the headlines now. Rand Paul said government is evil. And maybe not all of government. There might be some parts of government that aren't evil. But the reason Thomas Paine said that government is a necessary evil, because you have to have some government or you have anarchy. But the question is, how much of your freedom do you want to give up to not have anarchy, to have stability, or to have an organized living experience? And so what you would argue, if you believe that you're giving up liberty, you'd want to give up the least amount of liberty that you could give up to get just about, the smallest amount of government that you think you need. Because the more government you get, the less liberty you'll have. How could we explain this? You get your check, you get paid, you look at your check, and 50% of it's gone. And that's true for a lot of Americans. So really, 50% of your liberty to use and enjoy the fruits of your labor has been taken from you. And are you getting what you paid for? Look around you at what government does and say, am I getting what I paid for? I'll give you a couple of examples. We spent $800,000 studying Japanese quail to see if they're more sexually promiscuous on cocaine. We probably could have polled the audience, right, and saved a lot of money there. We spent $1.5 million studying if you take a selfie of yourself while smiling and then look at it later on in the day, will it make you happy? We spent nearly $1 million studying the mating call of the male Panamanian frog to see if the mating call is different in the country frogs from the city frogs. So the thing is, there might be some waste in government. Let's say you come from the left side and you say, well, what about all the money we waste on war? I'm with you there too. There's a lot of money wasted on bureaucracy and things that aren't really science, to a lot of money wasted overseas on things that actually are not making the world a better place. Afghanistan, we've been there for 20 years. I don't think it's any better than before we got there. I think they were killing us before we got there. They're going to kill each other after we leave. But we've been spending $50 billion a year paving their roads for them. My staff went over there to look at how some of the money was spent. And when they got there, there was like a 4-lane highway, but no cars were going up and down because people were living on the highway in tents. If a car wanted to go down the road, they had to get out of the car and shoo the people off of the highway from the tents. Within years, it was crumbling because no one could pay for the upkeep, so we gave them more money. But then we decided, well, we got to go green, and the military should be involved with improving the planet, so we built a natural gas station for them in Afghanistan. Well, that's interesting. Raise your hand if you have a car that runs on natural gas. Nobody in America's got a car that runs on natural gas. You think anybody in Afghanistan does? The average income in Afghanistan is about $800 a year. Very few people have cars, and I think they're the traditional internal combustion cars. But we built this. It was supposed to cost $800,000. It ended up costing $43 million. We wanted to go see if it actually, when my staff was in Afghanistan, they wanted to see if it actually really exists. We know we spent the money, but the military said that we would have to detach 60 Marines on different gunships to go protect them, to take them into this territory, and the decision was made that it wasn't worth, the loss of life to show us this gas station. So you paid for it, nobody uses it. It was for an egg-headed notion, and yet you can't even see whether it's even there. This is what goes on with your money. So, if you want to pay more in taxes, you can write more at the end. You're going to be either working, you'll be out to your career soon. You can always write and donate extra if you think we're doing a good job. But I think a good thought experiment, do you think whether government should be bigger or smaller, is this. If you want to help people, and you think, oh, no, I'm from the left, I don't care about all these conservatives, I just want to help people, I want to provide for people. If you had $1,000, who would you give it to if you wanted to feed people? Salvation Army or the federal government? So I think without question, if you want to help people, and philanthropists on both the right and the left, when they help people, they give it directly to charities because they're more efficient. There are charities like one in my hometown called Hotel Inc., helping hands through Christ, but in Christ. But anyway, what they do is they do something that I think is a marvelous thing. People come in, they don't give any cash. What they do is they sit down, they go through your bills with you, and they talk about sort of managing your finances, and then the organization writes a check to the utility company because they don't want to obviously give it for things they don't approve of, and they don't want to give it to be wasted, but they also want to impart some knowledge about how to manage your finances. So this is this question: what does it? Who does the functions that we need in society better, the government or the private marketplace? Would you give your own charity to the government, or would you give it to a private charity? I think these are important questions to ask, because then the next question is, when something new comes up, shouldn't we ask, could this not be done by the private marketplace? So there's the liberty argument. The argument is that the bigger your government, the less your liberty. But there's also an efficiency argument. And Milton Friedman put this forward, and the short composite of that is that nobody spends someone else's money as wisely as their own. And you can think about that. If I ask you each for $100 to invest in, let's see, I got this great idea, we'll buy GameStop. All right? All of you give me $100 and I'll go down to the end, we'll buy a GameStop. The thing is that if you had to make the $100 and you had to work for it, you think long and hard. It doesn't mean that you're going to make the perfect decision, but let's say all of you gave $100 and I've now got all the money. You make your decision. It's a heartfelt decision. But let's say I got it through taxes from you. Let's say it's not $5,000. I've got $5 million, and I'm a city councilman in Charlotte, North Carolina. Do you think I spend the $5 million as wisely as you would individually? No, but you can't have government that way. But it's an argument for why you shouldn't have government doing most things, because the people spending the composite of money are never very good with it. They aren't very efficient. We have programs around here that we authorized 30, 40, 50 years ago, and no one's ever revisited these programs. No one knows whether they work. If you want to come out and you say, I want to have government housing for people because there's not enough government housing, they'll pass it. That'll pass overwhelmingly, and you'll look, and the duplication report from the General Accounting Office will say, oh, we already had 82 of those. No one even bothers to look up that we already have 82 programs doing exactly what you want to do. Nobody really even looks at the government we have, because so much of this is symbolism for, oh no, it was in the news and people say something bad has happened in our country, so the federal government should do it. No one asks the question whether we're already trying to do it, whether we're successful at doing it, whether the old programs work. No one even asks whether it should be done at the federal level or at the state level. That was a big concern. Once upon a time when our land started, when our country started, the most important job was state legislator, not federal legislator. Federal legislature still dealt with issues of importance like war and boundaries and countries, but most of the things, if you wanted something done in your community, you went to your state legislature. We should do that now, because government is inherently inefficient, because they're spending other people's money, but the bigger and bigger it gets, the less efficient it gets. So you have these arguments for small government. You want to keep your liberty, you want to keep government small. You want to keep it efficient, the marketplace is better than the government. In making these choices as you look at government. And yet as you look around, you say, well, yeah, one party wants that, the other party doesn't. Well, how come the deficit's $28 trillion? Why have we had $6 trillion in deficit in the last 2 years? I thought Republicans cared about deficits. Who do you think, whose fault do you think it is that we have a $28 trillion deficit? Democrats? Yeah. Republicans? Yeah. Both parties are responsible. And some of this goes to the distinction between being a libertarian or a libertarian conservative and being a conservative. The left will tell you pretty freely. If AOC were here, and I wish she could have come today, but if she were here, she would tell you deficits don't matter. Now, there's some of the right to say that too. Dick Cheney and Lynn Cheney have said the same thing. Deficits don't matter. They just want to spend the money on different things. The left wants to spend it on more welfare kind of programs. The right wants to spend it on more military programs. So if you're fiscally conservative and believe we've got to have balanced budgets, both parties aren't doing a very good job on this. I'll give you an example. In 2012 is the last time we voted on a balanced budget amendment. The balanced budget amendment to the Constitution may not be a panacea, but for goodness sakes, nothing else is working. We pass all of these different rules, pay-as-you-go, Graham-Rudman, Hollins. Every time we pass a restraint on Congress, guess who evades it? Congress. In 2009, we passed something called pay-as-you-go. If I propose a new program that's going to cost $500 million, I've got to take it from somewhere in the budget or raise taxes to do it. We're just not going to add to the deficit because the deficit was a problem. Since we passed that in 2009, we've evaded it 67 times. We've never adhered to it. It has never been adhered to at all. It is the law of the land. And the interesting thing is you can make a budget point of order, so I do, and I bring up the budget point of order saying, yeah, we should do as the law says, pay as you go. And they always vote to override the budget point of order. This happened even on the tax cut. Many on the left said, oh yeah, Rand Paul, he thinks he's so fiscally conservative, but he just voted for trillions of dollars of debt with his tax cut. Well, there was a pay-go budget point of order that I brought up, and if there had been a deficit from lowering the taxes, which actually there wasn't, which is another point we'll get into, but had there been one, we would have had to cut spending somewhere. I'm for that. But we break our own rules. So the balanced budget amendment goes one step further. Instead of a statutory law saying we have to pay for things, we go to the Constitution. We say, you have to run a balanced budget. And the way we did it, because it's so far out of whack, people said, well, gosh, we got to give them some time. So what we put into the legislation was 5 years. Has to balance within 5 years. Most of the budgets I put forward balance in the 5th year because it's so far out of whack, even I can't conceive of how we do it in a year. But we balance it 5 years. So we pass it, every Republican votes for it. No Democrats vote for it. But then when the problem is so we've anticipated the Democrats aren't as concerned about it. The Republicans will tell you they are, or at least they pretend to be, but then at least half or more than half of the Republicans who vote for the balanced budget amendment vote for outrageously unbalanced budgets, vote for budgets that never balance. They started saying we're going to balance them in 10 years. But then they would back end it where the only cuts ever occurring were like in years 9 and 10, and they weren't believable cuts. It was just sort of budget shenanigans. But both parties are responsible for this. So we have to sort of get a notion that we really have to look everywhere. We can't just say, oh, we're going to win someday, and Republicans are going to have 2/3, and we'll just cut all the welfare. Or Democrats can say, if they're fiscally conservative, we're going to win 2/3, so we're just going to cut the military. It's all got to be cut. And actually, some of it's a restraint of growth. And I'll give you an example. You say, well, my grandmother has Alzheimer's disease, and I come to Washington to advocate for more money. So when they sit down in front of me, this is what I say to them. I said, we don't have any. We have no money. We're $1 trillion in debt with the normal expenditures. But I have compassion too. There can be a role for government in Alzheimer's research. But last year you got 100 million. Could you get by with 99 million? Every one of these people, and these are people emotionally involved in wanting money from government. You've seen all people with diabetes, people with hemophilia. Your heart goes out to these people. They all come to Washington. Or maybe it's to house poor people or for drug addicts or all these different things that government's trying to do. But the thing is you could balance your budget if you cut every program by 1%. And this is the opposite of what we tried to do. Often conservatives said, let's cut Sesame Street. And I say sometimes I vote against some of those individual ones anymore because it's not going to do anything to the budget. It's symbolic, and all you're doing is pissing off everybody on the left. So why not cut 1% of everybody's stuff? And then everybody would have to do less. If you tell this to a group of businessmen and women, most of them will look at you and say, yes, we've done that before. We've had to cut our expenditures by 1/3 in a year to stay in business. Businessmen and women get it. This happens every day. But you know what happens when it gets rough around here? When the economy gets bad, we spend more. This has been going on for a long time, but they think this sort of counter-cyclical thing that we're going to spend more and inject more money in. But we borrowed a lot. I'm very, very worried about how much we borrowed in the last 2 years. As a proportion, more than we borrowed during World War II, which was the record time for accumulating debt. And the thing is, it's what Bastiat would call the seen and the unseen. So the scene is, I'll write you a check for $2,500. This was coming from Republicans. President Trump was for this. The Republicans in Georgia were for this. They were going to be in the passing free money. They were trying to compete with the Democrats on passing out free money. But there isn't anything in life that's really free. If you think of common sense and you think of your life, did any of you get here? Did any of you do well in school by not working? All right, there's a few of you who are so smart you don't have to do work. But most of us had to read and write and work hard to get to where we were in life. But the thing is this idea that you're going to get a check for free and there are no ramifications, what happens is, and it may not be, it's sort of intended and unintended, seen and unseen, but it's very easy to see your check. You get your check and you say, gosh, this is great. I love my government. I love my senator. He sent me a check. Of course, we're assuming I'm sending it's like my money to send. There's no money. I'm just sending you future debt. But the thing is, if I send you $2,000 and a year later your goods that you buy have risen by $2,000, are you any richer? Even in normal times, and we're not in normal times, but over the last decade, and they underestimate inflation, they said it was 1.7% a year, 17% for a decade. There are statistics that show that some people, some in the working class, aren't getting ahead. Well, maybe it's because their income didn't increase 17% in a decade, but their expenditures did. See, this is what's going to happen. There is no free lunch. You can't pass out free checks to people. It is going to be taken from the currency or from the future. It has to be paid for. So we either take it from somebody sitting next to us who has some money, we do a certain amount of that, but we don't come anywhere close. We get it by monetizing the debt. Other countries borrow some of it. But as the Federal Reserve monetizes the debt, the currency becomes worth less and the goods rise. And sometimes it's worse than that. Sometimes as goods prices go up, they don't go up in a seamless way. They do ultimately generally go up, but they send the wrong signal through the supply chain. This is one of these things that people don't realize about capitalism. It is incredibly poised and thousands and millions of decisions and people making all the time, but it maximizes meeting supply and demand. And that's how prices are formed when the lines intersect. But capitalism maximizes that. You put something into the system that all of a sudden elevates the price of dough or cheese or this or that, all of a sudden you get unwise decisions and you may well get a recession. In the 70s, we had sort of a decade of the stock market going nowhere, and we had inflation we contended with. I worry that we could get that again. People say, oh no, it's just transitory. Time will tell. Almost everyone on television is telling you it's transitory, it's just the supply chain backed up, or perhaps we printed up so much money and borrowed so much money in a short period of time that the currency is going to lose its value in a precipitous way. This happens in other countries. It's happening in Venezuela as we speak. People say, well, we're not Venezuela. We realize that Venezuela was the richest country in South America. Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia. And now they eat their pets. They literally are eating their pets. Their currency has lost 1,000% of its value in a month. You know, it's amazing what they've done to a rich and great country. That's what happens when you spend money you don't have. Because though it could never happen here. The reason it doesn't happen as quickly, or hasn't happened so far in our country, is we're lucky. We're the reserve currency of the world. So as we print up money, we buy more stuff than we sell. We import more than we export, but as we import it, we give them dollars. So some of those dollars are exported as well. And they travel around the world, and you've all traveled, many of you traveled internationally. The dollar seems to be good everywhere. But other people look at it this. They say the dollar is the cleanest shirt in a closet full of dirty shirts. The dollar survives, not because it's a great currency, because everybody else is doing an even worse job manipulating their currency and monetizing their debt. But there is a breaking point. And the question is it a gradual breaking point, or will it be a precipitous breaking point? In a precipitous breaking point, you have chaos when it happens very rapidly. It happened in Germany after World War I, it happened in Zimbabwe, it's happening in Venezuela. But when it happens, there's social chaos. My wife and I wrote a book, The Case Against Socialism, and in the opening chapters we talk about a 16-year-old girl in Venezuela, and she's part of a gang. And the gang's job is to guard 4 dumpsters for food scraps. They literally are eating their pets in Venezuela. And so when you say that's socialism, people on the left, some of them might be here, I'm not sure. But the thing is people on the left will say that's not what we want. We want a kinder, gentler form of socialism. We want Bernie's socialism. We don't want the gulag. We want socialism without the gulag. But here's the thing. People who think socialism would be great if it were just democratic, they need to ask themselves, how come we have so many examples of socialism that wind up in authoritarianism? To me, it's sort of like basketball at the University of Kentucky. They come once, they're one and done, right? They come for 1 year and they're done. That's how you elect a socialist. They have one election and that's the last election. But there's another reason for it as well, and Hayek and others talked about this, that the reason you get ruthlessness, the reason we had Stalin, Hitler, and Hitler was a socialist, don't anybody tell you he wasn't a socialist, he was a peculiar brand of socialist, and he was proud of it. He was a socialist with an animus, with a racial animus towards the Jews. It was National Socialism, but it was socialism. You have Mao. You want to be scared to death of our young culture and our own culture? The head of Black Lives Matter wrote a little book. There's a woman interviewing, talking to her, and they're all so giddy and happy. And she said, oh, to the Black Lives Matter, your book reminded me so much of Mao's Little Red Book. If you are an admirer of Mao, you are either ignorant of history or evil. I would hope that she's just ignorant of history. 50 million people died under Mao. I mean, a disaster beyond almost any other disaster on the planet was Mao. But when you have socialism, when you begin, let's say the beginning stages of sort of an interventionist economy more like ours, and you say, oh, we're just going to tax you a little more, we're going to regulate a little more. So they're sort of taking your property but not completely taking it. People mostly resist at the ballot box, and that's a good thing. We should hopefully do this peacefully through a political process. But there comes a point at which time people will resist. So the more complete socialism you want, the more complete ownership of both land, property, and the means of production that you want in the hands of the government, you got to take it from somebody. And when you take it from somebody, ultimately there is a point of resistance. So what happens is the more complete the socialism, the more ruthless the dictator has to be. If you got a kinder, gentler, and I like Bernie, if it were Bernie, he probably wouldn't have the ruthlessness to take your property so that it have to go to the next person. But it evolves. That's what happens. If you want complete socialism, if you want to take people's property, it evolves and it requires an iron fist. But people on the other side who think socialism is a good idea need to look at all of this. Example after example after example. You've got Castro, Pol Pot, can you imagine? You go on and on of all of these examples. And they say, oh no, that's just authoritarianism. So I was on The View one time. I don't recommend it. So Ana Navarro is supposedly a Republican. I don't believe that either. But anyway, she's on there. She's yelling at me in one ear, and a woman from the left, Whoopi Goldberg, yelling at me in the other. But Ana Navarro's yelling at me about Venezuela, and she's like, Chavez and Maduro, they're murderers and thugs. And I said, yes, and socialist. The point of my book, my wife's book, The Case Against Socialism, was that there's a connection between thuggery, between authoritarianism and socialism. Because if you want to take people's stuff and they've already got it, they sometimes don't want to give it to you. Read Dr. Zhivago, one of the most poignant scenes in there. He comes back and he used to have a nice house and they decided your house is too big for just you. That's fine. They've appropriated his house. He now can live in one small area of his house, but they're burning the furniture. A society goes to nothing. A society produces nothing and just consumes everything. The most humanitarian system ever conceived of is capitalism. The poorest people in our country are richer than most of the middle class in the rest of the world. People die to get into our country. People want to come here. You'll hear about them breaking in and trying to go to most countries in the world. They want to come here for what we have. But we need to appreciate it, for goodness sakes. There were polls of young people in the recent years, this is why we wrote the book, is that over half of young people, when polled, think socialism would be worth a try. Well, it doesn't work. I mean, the economists proved this 100 and some odd years ago. Mises and Hayek and Milton Friedman, they all proved that the disincentives lead to less growth. That the whole pricing system that seems to be this mystery is an incredibly important thing, but you have to have freely interacting people and goods to figure out what the price is. Nobody has an idea what the price of milk should be. No government official could set it. And if you set it too high, it'll stay on the shelf. You set it too low and it's gone. I mean, price setting, price fixing leads to either glut or to scarcity. Socialism doesn't work. Now people will say, oh, no, but we want the Bernie socialism, the kinder, gentler socialism like they have in Sweden. But if you look at the facts of Sweden, Sweden's been running headlong away from socialism since the mid-70s. They were headed that direction. They had confiscatory wealth taxes. Guess what? All the wealthy people left. Bjorn Borg, the tennis player, the founder of IKEA, all the people just left. They finally had to beg some of their wealthy people that had been there for over 100 years to come back. But you say, oh, no, Sweden's this paradise. They have free, everything's free. Oh, realize nothing's really free. You pay for it one way or another. They do. They do have the so-called free stuff. Free college, free health care, all this free stuff. But they don't get it by taxing the top 1%. So everything IOC says, and even though I'm friends with Bernie, everything they say on taxes is completely a lie if they want to be like Sweden. Sweden has a very regressive, compared to us, tax code. Everybody pays a 25% sales tax. The income tax is 60%, starting at $60,000. So yes, you can get free stuff if you're willing to have everybody, the middle class and the poor, pay higher taxes. there's not enough in the 1%. You can take all the money of the 1%. But the money just isn't replaced. You've taken away their ingenuity. They no longer, now they're going to be a John Galt's Gulch, right? You take all their money away, is the ingenuity still there? But the thing is we're still having this discussion here in our country. You know, President Biden says he's not going to tax anybody under $400,000. We're just going to take it from those above. Really, one of the problems above and beyond that the math doesn't add up is the more people we take off the tax rolls, the less they care about government. So if you make $50,000 and you're a husband and wife and you have 2 kids, with all the tax credits, you don't pay any income tax. In fact, you get money back through the child credit, the earned income tax credit. You'll get money back. And the thing is if you don't pay anything in, do you care what the deficit is or what the taxes are? So if we get to enough of a point where we either have enough non-workers, which we have a large body of non-workers, in Kentucky we call them the drawers and the non-drawers. Somebody told me, well, when I went in the mountains, they would say, you know about the drawers and the non-drawers. And I said, what do you mean, the artists? You have an artist colony? No, the drawers and the non-drawers. The ones who draw a check and the ones who don't draw a check. But if you get too many people in the wagon and not enough people pulling the wagon, ultimately you don't go anywhere. There is a danger of that. There's a danger of, even in a democratic republic like we have, of getting so many people either not working or not paying taxes that ultimately there's nobody that cares anymore about these things. We're about here now. Even though still more people pay taxes than not, nobody seems to care about it. I mean, look at last week. Republicans joined with Democrats to pass this endless frontiers thing. We're going to combat Chinese communism with American socialism. You know, we're going to pay for all this technology by the taxpayer. We gave all the money to this group called the National Science Foundation. They're the ones that do the studies on quail, the studies on frogs, the studies on happiness. And how bad is the track record of the National Science Foundation? You can go back to 1972 when William Proxmire was a conservative Democrat from Wisconsin and a Golden Fleece Award. His first one was to the National Science Foundation for a study about what makes people fall in love. Which sounds like a good Cosmo article. You know, I wouldn't be that, but that's ridiculous that we're paying money for that. We've been doing it for 50 years. So that recent bill increased their budget by 70%. So we just flooded more money into a group that's never spent wisely. In fact, I think if you want to get rid of waste in government, we tried doing it by passing controls and trying to say, okay, please don't waste anymore and you have to do this kind of report. The way you get rid of all waste in government is cut everybody's budget by 1%. Don't get rid of all, but everybody will be looking for it. Ways not to cut salaries, ways not to fire people, ways to still do what you can do with 1% less. It would be an amazing experiment, and it would make us so much stronger if we would do it. I'll end with this. If you want to help people, if your desire is to help your fellow man, if you feel obligated to helping your fellow man, you want to them, you have to believe in capitalism. No other economic system helps people the way capitalism does. Capitalism allows the excess wealth to be then given back into the community. I frankly would rather have people who've succeeded in hiring 90,000 employees give it back than I would be sending it to a bureaucrat up here. They just don't do it well. Everything's backwards. Everything has a disincentive to work. You know, we have disincentives to marriage, disincentives to work, littered throughout our programs. Right now, if you are both unemployed in Kentucky and you have 2 kids, it's well over $70,000 in unemployment. Who's going back to work? You're not very smart if you're going back to work, actually. All the incentives say don't work if you make less than $70,000. There are some states up in New England, it's well over $100,000 for 2 unemployed people with 2 children. Well over $100,000. So this is a huge gap. We're having trouble getting people to go back to work. But it's important to work. The work isn't, hopefully all of you will feel this way about work. Work is not a punishment. Work is a reward. It's an amazing thing. It's how you get your self-esteem. Nobody can give you self-esteem. Self-esteem comes from work. And it doesn't matter if you're cleaning the floors or you own the building. It comes from work. And there's work of all forms, and it's all rewarding. But if you don't work, it leads to big problems, and big problems for society. So we should be doing everything to get people back to work, not because we dislike them and want to give them less money, or because we don't have the money that we're giving to them, but 2, because we care about them. We want them to get back into the workforce. Capitalism is the most humanitarian system ever conceived by man. If you want to look at the successes of capitalism, a great website is called humanprogress.org. And on it, they catalog poverty from about 1820 to the present. In 1820, everybody lived in extreme poverty. This is measured as $2 a day or less in current dollars. That's not much money, $2 or less. 98% of people lived in extreme poverty in 1820 at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. When I'm born in the early 1960s, it goes from 90% extreme poverty to about a third. From the 1960s to today, less than 10%. This is not just the US, this is the entire world. The entire world, less than 10% of the world lives on $2 a day. Now there's still poverty and there's still poor people, but it's getting better. Everything you see on TV is a lie. People say, the big lie this, the big lie that. Everything is a lie. This is the best time ever to be alive. There's never, ever been a better time to be alive. Whether you're talking about racism, or you're talking about enslavement, or you're talking about material wealth, or you're talking about advancement of women, or you're talking about the freedom to be who you are in your private life, where people, you can live your life the way you want to. There's never been a better time. Never in history, and yet every day we're told, oh, everybody hates each other because of the race. I don't see any of that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I know people who go to a shopping center and people look at them, they say, oh, they're being followed because they're black. Yes, there are bad things that still happen, but it's better than it has ever been in the history of the world. We need to figure out that we can get beyond these things. And if we're so woe is me that it's a terrible country and everything's about racism and the whole country was founded on this terrible thing and we're never getting beyond it, we need to teach 5-year-olds that the white ones are oppressors and the white ones need to be in one room, the black ones in another room. That is so terrible. It's against everything that Martin Luther King talked about. We're supposed to be judging each other on the content of our character, not on the color of our skin. And most of us do that. Most of us, if we're honest, do that. It's not a perfect world, but it's better than it's ever been. Women do better than they've ever done in any society, in any world ever. So be optimistic towards the future, but be aware that you have to have the freedom of an economic system like capitalism or it'll slip away. Thank you very much.